Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
It is 9 a.m. Central Time in Sioux Falls on Tuesday, October 6th. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Sioux Falls Board of Ethics. And before we proceed with the agenda, I just want to say that this board will stay masked throughout the meeting, and I would, unless you have a medical reason, and we don't need to know what that is, we would ask that all the other attendees at this meeting also, out of a matter of care and respect, that you also wear masks throughout this meeting. I'll now call the roll.
We might want to wait until we have a minute taker.
Okay. Donnie Wall, would you please call the roll?
Dan Fritz,
Here.
Sue Rust,
Here.
Greg Neitzert,
Here.
Jeff Marsh,
Here.
Mona Harris. Here.
Okay, a quorum is present, full board is in attendance. Just an item regarding the agenda today. We have two items on the agenda. One is a request for an advisory opinion known as 20-3 from Councilor Janet Brekke. And we also have a request for an investigation filed by, or submitted by David Zokaities. So we will, if the chair wishes to accept public testimony on those two items, unless the board objects to that. And I would say that for public input, if the public input portion, if you want to address this board regarding other matters, that's the time. But if your comments are specific to either the advisory opinion or to the request for an investigation, you may wish to hold those until those come up on the agenda. So first item on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from August 26th. In those minutes, there is a reference to a letter that I signed on behalf of the board that went to City Council, and the minutes show that a copy is attached. Bonnie Willow will make sure that that indeed is distributed and also will be available for public posting. It has been publicly posted on the City Council's website. Is that correct, Bonnie? But to make sure that the record is clear with the Board of Ethics, that also will be available as an attachment to these minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the August 26th meeting?
So moved.
Moved by Dan. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Greg Neitzert. Any changes or corrections? All in favor of accepting the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Approved. We now move to the public input section with a 5-minute time limit available to anybody who is a resident of the city of Sioux Falls. Please, if you wish to address items other than the request for the advisory opinion or the request for an investigation, this would be the time to come forward.
Greetings. I'm David Zokaities, and I'm here to talk about ethical practice kind of in a general case. I'm going to start with a little bit from your homepage. The Board of Ethics has a homepage on siouxfalls.org, and let me read one of the goals that is on that homepage. The proper operation of a republic requires that public officers and officials be honest, impartial, and responsible to the people. That government decisions and policies be made in the proper channels of the governmental structure. That public office not be used for personal gain, and that the public have confidence in the integrity of the government. That part's important. Confidence in the integrity of the government. The purpose of the Board of Ethics is to promote these beliefs. Now, this whole bit, the last sentence is the most important. The Board of Ethics is to promote these beliefs. Very important. So, an underlying issue that I've noticed is that city officials have received gifts of paid travel. This is a violation of city ordinance, and it looks like maybe there's some bribery. I want to know who accepted these gifts of paid travel, when it happened, how many times gifts were accepted, and how much money was involved. We can't have integrity if you have secret stuff like this going on in the background. It's just not smart. Now, the Ethics Board and City Council and South Dakota government have kind of gotten together, maybe intentionally or like appearance-wise, and they've tried to hide some of these problems. We found an excuse to reject an ethics complaint, 20A.
Mr. Zokaities, with due respect, are you now bringing forward your request for an investigation?
It's kind of related, but this is a general background on the problem.
Because we have you down later on the agenda
Yes.
to present your request.
They are related, but a little bit different.
Okay, proceed.
Sure, okay. So oh yes, you've kind of like gone around and tried to hide some of these problems. In particular, your letter to the City Council said that gifts are a common situation and that no repercussions are necessary. So what I'm reading that is saying that if it's a really common problem, then it's not a problem. And that's not a way to promote integrity in government. And there was also some question as to whether or not the ordinance is confusing. I found it pretty easy and straightforward. And then City Council voted that there were no problems. Oh, I didn't like that at all. Okay, South Dakota Department of Criminal Investigation, they ignored my request to investigate. And I'm hoping that the Ethics Board will promote integrity and transparency in all things. Now, one thing I've noticed is that Ordinance 35 needs some work. I've reported on previous problems with that to City Council. Really haven't gotten anywhere. Today, I'm pointing out one more problem. You've got sections 35.029 and 35.053. They read nearly identically, and this is a source of confusion. You ought to try to mash these two sections together so that people that read this ordinance have fewer points of confusion. That's a particular problem because if you cite the wrong section, your complaint gets tossed out. So there you have it. I'm requesting that the Board of Ethics promote integrity in government and find these problems, improve the ordinance, and promote integrity in government. There you have it.
Thank you, Mr. Zokaities. Anyone else wish to come forward? Identify yourself.
Bruce Danielson. First off, I actually want to say thank you. Which most of you probably will find strange, but the letter you issued I thought was very clear, and I was very pleased to see that it went through the process. I'm also pleased to see that Mr. Peterson is here and watching the goings-on this morning, because I thought that he did a nice job presenting at the city council meeting. The overall, we accomplished something here, we now have what I'm referring to as the Neitzert rule, because it's never been done before. We've never, as far as any of us know, it's never been brought to the city council with any kind of a probable cause. And now we have a process. It was never codified into the ordinance how the process was to work very clearly. So at least now we have a precedent to start working on it. And that is appreciated. We need to have people know that if you guys find probable cause, then something is going to happen. There's a process that goes through. We can't just slip it away and say, oh, doesn't matter, who cares? It's the probable cause is probable cause. You know, I've brought several items to this body. I got caught in the confusion of 29 versus 53, which one I was supposed to use. I would ask that this body consider putting in a rule amongst your rules that you'll adopt, the ability for you to help the individuals like me or like David or anybody else, John Cunningham's, all these different people who bring things to this body, the ability to say, we'll allow you to amend the complaint on the spot, because it's really important. The city attorney's office in the past, and I've been doing this now for 6 years, coming here, lodging complaints, I didn't know how to go about the process. I asked the city attorney's office at that time, how do I do this process? And they said, well, fill out this form and then you'll have to figure it out or you'll have to hire an attorney. Well, that's not the public good. This body is here for the public good. You proved that you can do the public good by opening up a process that we've known for years is an issue in the background, but we haven't had the ability to actually have a process. You now have that process. I would like you to amend the process to say, if Bruce Danielson comes before this body and there's an error in it, allow Bruce Danielson to make an amendment to that to follow the correct ordinance, because it's going to keep happening. I understand the difference between the way it has to be handled with city employees versus elected officials. We have what I'm also calling an impeachment process. You people are in a unicameral body doing the impeachment process. You are setting down a probable cause indictment or impeachment for the city council to decide. Since we are a unicameral government, somebody has to start that process, and it's you. Please consider putting into the rules and having a discussion in the public so that we can be part of it to correct the one issue that we have, and that's allowing us to be able to amend our complaint on the spot to make it fit properly. And if then, in order to amend the complaint, we have to go to a second meeting to finish it so the public has an ability to be there and be part of it, I think that's all for the better for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Danielson. Any further public input today? All right, very good. We will proceed now with item number 4, a request for an advisory opinion, which we cite as 20-3, filed by City Councilor Janet Brekke. And this is filed, just one moment. This is filed under City Ordinance 35.053, City Ordinance Conflicts of Interest. So I would ask the city attorney, do you believe that this Board of Ethics has jurisdiction over this request for an advisory opinion?
I do, Mr. Chair, and primarily I would just cite two city ordinances. One is City Ordinance 35.010M, paragraph M, which states the Board of Ethics may render advisory opinions at the request of an elected official of the city with respect to 35.050 through 35.059. which this references per Councilor Brekke's request 35.053, so it fits within that, as well as City Ordinance 35.057, which is lengthy, so I will not read the entirety of it, but I do believe it helps establish jurisdiction for this matter.
Okay, the chair will rule that we now have jurisdiction over this matter unless there's objection from any member of the board.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the
Certainly.
city attorney. In your opinion, does the code indicate any differentiation between retrospective and prospective actions?
Well, that's one that Councilor Brekke and I have discussed in the past. I mean, in this particular question, she's asking, actually at the time that she filed it, she was asking prospectively, but of course that time came and went. So now it's retroactive, but the city ordinance does state in 35.057 that advisory opinions may be requested by any city official who seeks the Board of Ethics opinion to guide that official's own conduct. So there is a forward-looking component to that. That being said, like in today's matter, there's, you always have to look at the facts, and there's also a body of precedent with the Ethics Board that has said we're not going to get into speculative, type things, but speculative behaviors, sort of the if I do X then Y or whatever. So you also you kind of have to look at the fact that is this limited to the facts as presented. Now, Councilor Brekke has provided a set of facts, and those are the ones that you would advise regarding, and to the extent that that can guide the council or anybody else's future behavior, I think that's a benefit. But I think that is different than any kind of, just in reliance on the precedent that this board has set. There's really just that balance of, well, we're not going to get into a bunch of different hypotheticals. That's sort of a discretionary matter on behalf of the board, but of course you are bound to an extent by the precedent that's been set in the past.
So we're okay, it's a four-corner deal.
I think it's a four-corner deal. I think, Councilor Brekke will address the board and provide her request, but she did provide a specific set of facts that again, in some respects have occurred, but I trust that she's also here looking for guidance as to future behavior, but the facts are relatively narrow.
Good, thank you.
Any further questions of the city attorney? All right, Councilor Brekke, we invite you to come forward and we're going to swear you in, please.
Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you shall give relative to this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the penalties of perjury? I do.
Councilor Brekke, you have the floor.
Thank you. I think it's really going to expedite things if I kind of just go through my request, because I have been sworn now and I want to say this under oath, and then I just want to, kind of explain why I did not withdraw the request and why I agree with the city attorney that I think it's helpful not only to me but others in the future. It will help me with my future conduct, as well as understanding, how I proceeded in this particular situation. First of all, I just want to, as a preface, I just want the board to understand that the attachments that I received, I kind of rearranged them, so I put them in chronological order. For me, that was obviously a very uncomfortable situation to be in, because I received these and I had not been privy to the confidential hearings. And so as this hearing proceeding is progressing, I'm realizing somehow that at least two of the defenses that were being presented in moving the case forward, what I call the conspiracy theory and the common practice theory, involved me, but I didn't know any details. And I never knew any details, even during the hearing. I didn't, because we received this packet of 180 pages the night of the hearing as we walked into the room. So I did not know to what extent my activities were being questioned. So I was in a difficult position of, and I felt as the writings proceeded, I kept getting these unsolicited commentaries accusing me of things and demanding. I mean, they're actually demanding action of me. And I don't know what it is. I only know what I did, which I put in here, which I will testify to. I didn't know all the things that I was alleged to have did or how I was involved. So my reaction was when I got the final one, the one on September, I think it was September 7th, and it was demanding a response by noon of that day. I just thought, wait a minute, just because the accused is saying I did certain things, I know what I did and didn't do, but I need help from the Board of Ethics. And they are the final say on whether I really had a conflict of interest. And I'm going to go to them, realizing that I may be putting you in a difficult situation of trying out the timing of the thing, but I really wanted to know, I wanted the safety net of your guidance before I put myself into that situation. And I hold no grudges that you couldn't comply with it, and so I'll simply tell you I did the best I could without the safety net of your advice, because I've appeared with you several times. I probably will appear with you several times in the future, because I've said before, and I'll say it again, I think it's an ethical minefield out there, the way that our government is running currently right now. And I want to have a relationship with this board. I want to get their guidance, and I want to follow it. So that is why I didn't withdraw it, even though I made the decision. I didn't withdraw it because I could see it coming up again. And the citizen Bruce Danielson testified to that kind of issue about what I did, and I will testify to that now, and then I'll just talk a little bit about what I thought I was operating under in terms of the good government, and I put it right in there, which is that civic responsibility that we have to help citizens who are engaged in governmental processes, to help them understand the processes. So I'm just going to go through and more or less read it in the record and just embellish it a little bit, what my testimony is with regard to my involvement with the complaints 20A and 20B. There were 2 complaints filed with the Ethics Board, complaint 20A and 20B. I had no involvement or communication with the filing of either of those complaints. I had no contact with the complainant with regard to 20A. As to complaint 20B, the first time I did talk to the complainant was, after the hearing, the initial hearing on it when it was dismissed for jurisdiction. And you will recall that I got up, I talked to the board at that time. I was agitated because I thought that, it was improper for the board to not answer the question why it didn't have jurisdiction. And I'm glad today to see the city attorney come in and explain the jurisdiction issue and the fact that there was jurisdiction for my own complaint in front of the public, and have that public, that be given in public as opposed to a private discussion and then just an announcement. I was also concerned at that time that he wasn't advised that he had that it wasn't without prejudice, which means that he could refile it or amend it. And I thought those things were things that should have been announced in public to him so that he understood what happened at that hearing. So I did go out and I visited with him at that time, and I really just alerted him, and he kind of testified to it at the hearing. He said, I told him, read your rules of procedure, read the 2 sections. There's 2 different sections that mirror each other. One's for city officials, one's for elected officials, and you cited the wrong one. And so I did give him that information at that time. There were 3 other conversations, I believe it was 3 afterwards, and I think as best as I can tell when I tried to recreate those events, they paralleled the different stages of the hearing process. Because I seemed to get a call from him or a text from him asking for me to call him, as he was preparing for, a meeting with the Ethics Board or after. So it was, it was in anticipation or after where he was calling me. And I made sure to really just restrict the conversations to the procedural issues. And while there's whether he understands I was talking about jurisdiction and sufficiency and those things or not, there was some unclarity, but in my mind, I knew I was comfortable telling him what his job was as he was going through that process. I talked to him about probable cause. I told him that means you have the burden. It's on you. You have to prove your case. You have to bring it forward. They're expecting you to be the presenter. I talked to him, the issue came up with witnesses, and I told him that the board is the only one that's authorized to issue the subpoena, so you have to go to the board and you have to ask them, you know, if you want to subpoena somebody, and you have to, you know, convince them that they should do that on your behalf. And so, you know, and there was, you know, there was something in that conversation, again, that was around, you know, one of the points in the hearing. And then at the very end, I think he called me one other time and he was talking about filing something supplemental. And was it, you know, what he could put in a supplemental filing? Could he kind of restate his original stuff, and or did he have to present all new stuff or whatever? And so those were basically, in sum and substance, the conversations that I had with him. As soon as the board found probable cause, and the very first meeting where the council had anything to do with it at all, because it was clear in the ordinance that as soon as you guys issued that report of probable cause, the city council assumes jurisdiction. It states that very clear. It's in the ordinance. So in my mind, I need to talk about my conduct, you know, with John right away. And so I just announced that publicly at that very first hearing, that I had those previous conversations with him. And also, when I had those conversations with him, knowing about the confidentiality provision, I did not share those conversations that he and I had with anyone, with no council members, with no one. It just, there was no point in that. He was asking for procedural advice. I would have preferred to send him to the city attorney's office to get that procedural advice, but that was not, it did not appear at that time that that was available. That's something Stacy and I have talked about since then. It's part of what I'd still like to talk about to the board today. But continuing on then, each of the conversations involved procedural questions regarding the City Board of Ethics rules. The complainant told me that neither the board or the attorney would answer his procedural questions, and I kind of saw that in my opinion, what took place that day felt like that to me, that the board was not willing to answer his questions, and so I felt like I needed to do that. The subjects we spoke about were sufficiency, jurisdiction, probable cause, burden of proof, subpoena of witnesses, supplemental filings. I never appeared at any of the hearings on the complainant's behalf. I never discussed legal strategy or advocated for the complainant. I avoided discussions on the merits of the case. I never discussed the content of my discussions with the complainant to anyone. The night the City Council received the report and assumed jurisdiction, I disclosed these communications publicly, which is the practice of the City Council when we are serving in a quasi-judicial capacity. I immediately ceased communication. He did text me that night and asked to meet with Pat and I, which is the first time I had ever received anything like that. And I just said, no, you know, the City Council has jurisdiction. I cannot advise you anymore. I did actually call Stacy and talk to him about that. I said, I am going to be referring him over to you if he's got questions. You know, he needs, you know, some guidance, you know, as he's going forward in a hearing process where there's never even been this process anymore. So I did stop all the communications. I told him I can't answer your procedural questions any longer because the City Council has jurisdiction. And I have had these types of discussions with numerous citizens over the years, you know, both in my capacity as, you know, the city attorney, my capacity as a city council member, and just my capacity as former city attorney. A lot of times people ask me about how to do things in city government, and I feel that I can guide people in that way, and I feel it's helpful. It is something that I should be doing on a personal level and on a professional level as a city council member. Pursuant to city ordinances, Canon 34-009 7B, you know, I cite that as really what I call my justification for what I think is the responsibility of this office. I mean, I think we have an obligation in government, and particularly as the city grows, some of our processes are very complex, and it's hard for them to navigate. I have pushed, you know, I have pitched the idea of an ombudsman. Larger cities have ombudsmen, I can't say that word today, that help, you know, champion citizens' causes, and it would be a perfect position to have running out of the city council office as kind of a check and balance on our larger city, on our larger government. A lot of things fall through the cracks, and I'm seeing that. Some council members, I would say all council members, take certain citizens' issues and help them in areas where they feel comfortable. And some of us maybe more so than others, you know, work with individual citizens, you know, on issues. But, you know, I do think that that's an important part of our job and that it's our responsibility to help them in ways that we can, in ways that we have experience or ways that we have knowledge that's helpful to them. But I don't want to get crosswise with the Board of Ethics. I don't want to get crosswise with the City Attorney's Office. I don't want to be doing their job. But I do see a need. I do see a strong need for just procedural information to be presented to people, to the general public as a whole, because not only has it helped the citizens that maybe want to navigate, for example, this process, but in other quasi-judicial issues, it helps the public understand what we're doing, why we're going into executive session. Why shouldn't they be educated on that whole process of executive session and what's it about, and then see us do it, on the more procedural advice that we can give, or the more procedural knowledge that we can share with the public that doesn't affect the merits of anything, I think the better for government. And I do see a need for that. And that was really why I allowed myself to be involved in this situation. Then since the City Council assumed jurisdiction, again, I put that I received these communications. One of the things I was struggling with was my role, and that's why I used the word ex parte. I mean, these communications were not sent to the complainant. They were sent to me and I'm in a judicial capacity or a quasi-judicial capacity. It's like telling the judge to get off of my case. And so, again, I think I explained that at the beginning of this and just re-explained it at the end. For me, I really wasn't interested in getting further crosswise with my fellow council member. I just wanted to know, because again, I know what I did. I didn't know what I said I did. And so I wanted to bring that issue forward. And the reason I gave it considerable thought, okay, do I want to drag this thing on? But no, I really do, because I do think each and every time that I come before this board and requested these public advisory opinions, like it or not, and some of my fellow council members don't like it when I do this, but I do think it does help give us guidance. Because if this happens in the future, and it could, and people would seek me out because they know I have that knowledge, I could get those phone calls. And it would be my tendency to say, hey, I can talk to you about the procedure, but I'm not going to review your complaint. I'm not going to look at it. I'm not going to do those, review your documents or anything like that. But I can tell you what your job is as you navigate this process. And that's really what I limited myself to in this situation. So that's really all I have as far as presentation. I'm certainly willing to answer any questions you have. And as far as my actual involvement, I'm more than happy to answer questions of that. And I don't know if it's relevant to this issue today, but maybe it will when David presents his thing, this whole issue of third-party pay and the trip that I took. There were some missing pieces when I finally did have an opportunity after the hearing to read, what was placed in there about my trip. There was some very valid information that was not placed in there along with it, which I would look forward to correcting that misconception as well. So I would just take any questions that you have at this point.
Councilor Brekke, we thank you for your testimony this morning. You have filed an advisory opinion regarding, and you cited City Ordinance 35.053. I think it would be helpful for this board if the city attorney might advise us now on what our options are as we proceed. As I understand it, we may have 4 possible options here, and I think we should, I would ask you, Mr. City Attorney, to lay those out for us, and then we will proceed with a discussion with Councilor Brekke.
Yeah, happy to do that, Mr. Chair. So 35.053 is really the scope within which Councilor Brekke requests an advisory opinion. I'm not going to read 35.053. It has a number of paragraphs and subparagraphs. I think the board would be within its right to ask Councilor Brekke if there's any specific provision she's asking about. So I think the board is within its rights to render a decision on that, one way or the other. There are, as provided in city ordinances that I mentioned at the beginning of our hearing. There are other ethical provisions that apply to city councilors. Councilor Brekke referred to the canon of ethics, so that's chapter 34. And then there's also 35.054, which is the standards of conduct, which is, because they are able to request advisory opinions on any ordinance 35.050 through 35.059. Councilor Brekke didn't request as to that. So that would be an expansion. I don't know that the board is interested in broadening the scope of that today, but that's one that the board could discuss and get thoughts from Councilor Brekke on that as well. Councilor Brekke is also here requesting advice on this and providing her information. And so there are really one of two things that the board could do there. Say, well, do we have enough information to render a decision on that, or are we interested in conducting an investigation in that?
Based on the testimony we've heard.
Correct. Because as far as Mr. Cunningham that she spoke with and that sort of thing, I don't know that the board is interested in going to those lengths. But those are really the options as I see them, which is basically rule on it today based on the scope of the request, expand that, or find that there isn't enough information or conduct an investigation.
And if we were to decide we don't have enough evidence today, we would have to serve notice that there's going to be a further hearing. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. I mean, an alternative to that is to render a decision based on information you do have today. That's an opportunity to say, well, we've been provided this information, it's under oath, so it qualifies as evidence, and you can say, well, under the facts as presented here today, we do or do not find that there's an issue. As far as broadening it, she's not requesting that. I don't know that the board wants to do that, but as you just look at the range of options that are out there, those are kind of how I would break them down.
Okay. Any questions from the board on what our options are?
No.
Okay. And so I would ask you, Councilor Brekke, when you cited 35.053, did you have a specific subsection in mind?
I really didn't. I was responding to, again, not knowing, I was responding to the attachments. All the allegations were stating, recuse yourself, you have a conflict of interest. They say the state law, which is irrelevant because we're a home rule city, and in Sioux Falls, it's our conflicts of interest ordinance, and you are the guys that make the determination. So I went to the conflicts of interest ordinance. Again, not having the benefit of being able to have the safety net, I just read them as carefully as I could, and I said, these are all about really pretty much financially related, having a special financial interest and all of that. I didn't see anything that gave me a conflict of interest. And, the only thing that, was being raised was that, I had, some, relationship with John, or I was part of some big political conspiracy, which I wasn't. So, and John, testified under oath, I think before you and under oath at the hearing, that he was acting independently. He always was. He continued to act independently, and at the time of the hearing, because he couldn't get his questions answered, he got an attorney. So I think that, to me, was a narrow issue that I really wanted advice on, because that was, under oath, that was my involvement.
So, Councilor Brekke, you of course have initiated this because you're asking for an advisory opinion. We've heard from the city attorney that we then have various options. We could expand the scope of it. We could have a further investigation, or we could, I suppose we could dismiss as well. What is your preference? Do you want us to? Are you asking for a ruling based on what you have just now presented, or do you think we should expand the scope or take some other approach?
Well,
Since you initiated and asked for the advisory opinion, would you just clarify for us what you would like us to deal with today?
I'd like the opinion based on what I presented, because that is my sworn statement as to what my involvement was with John Cunningham and those complaints. And I think you have had testimony from John, which I would feel more than comfortable that you are allowed to consider in whatever previous hearings that you had with him, or the testimony that he gave at the hearing, for those of you that are with that.
Very good. Any further clarification?
No, I think to that, and with that request and with what she's presenting, and of course the language of 35.053, and obviously the absence of anyone else arguing anything to the contrary, when you look at things like public notice and that sort of thing, I would just say that the board, in light of that, wants to render a decision based on the evidence presented today and the scope provided within 35.053. I think that's reasonable for the board to do. I would encourage some clarification on that in the decision, that it's not broadening the scope, or it's not applying an analysis of chapter 34, you know, the canons and all of that, because really it's not at bar, so to speak. It's not in front of the board. And just in the interest of clarity, I think the board was in its right to provide a decision within, again, the scope of what Constable Brekke provided, which is that ordinance.
So my recommendation to the board is that we have further discussion with Councilor Brekke. We take any public testimony that anyone wishes to offer, and then we deliberate on this matter, and maybe even call Councilor Brekke forward again during our deliberation. Is that agreeable to the board?
Yes.
That approach? Okay. So the floor is open. Questions from the board to Councilor Brekke.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just have comments as opposed to questions in there. I apologize if they seem to be rambling. I'm ending 8 years of service of maybe questionable value to this board, but I've been here for a very long time. First of all, I absolutely agree and believe your chronology. I accept the veracity of what you've said. I accept your explanation of your intent. And I think we need to talk about the question of perception. And perception is external, not internal. It's not necessarily, there's two sides to this. One is what I felt, and the other is what that elusive, reasonable person, fully apprised of the facts, you know, that legal concept that you understand probably a lot better than I do, what that person might, or a group of people might infer from what's going on. I've said before at this board, trying to point out that ethics are not rules-based. Law is rules-based. Ethics are principle-based. So it is always a matter of interpretation. And it's a matter of interpreting what your internal intent is and estimating or considering what that reasonable person might be concluding. So the speed limit example, for you're out on the highway and the speed limit's 75, you can drive 75, but there's also another part of the speed limit that talks about principles, which says it has to be reasonable under the current circumstances. So if it's foggy and icy and you're driving 75, the highway patrol might well give you a ticket, and you don't get to say, well, I was going under 75, because there's two parts. So there's rules and then there's principles, and we're talking about principles. So the issue then becomes a conflict between your perceived duty, and I use the word perceived carefully. That doesn't imply that it's not your duty, it's just that's your interpretation of your duty and how far you go to assist a constituent. And whether or not that rises to the level of appearance of impropriety. So how much can I assist this person because I perceive that as my value without crossing that line I don't know where it is, without crossing the line and rising to the level of that reasonable person assuming or inferring that you're acting unethically. So that appearance deals with all of the facts and circumstances. And I believe that those facts and circumstances include everything that you've done and who all of the parties are. And part of that, which became apparent at the city commission meeting and is painfully apparent to everybody else, is that there are political differences. I would say partisan, but we're not partisan, but there are most certainly political factions within the city council. There are people that we agree with and other people that we don't agree with, and there's a group over here, there's a group over here. That's widely known. We may not talk about it, but it's widely known. So when an action is taken that involves across those groups, it might be inferred, again, by that reasonable person, fully apprised of the facts, that might change their assumption. And I think it's dependent on you being anyone, it's dependent on that person's judgment to say, which of these things is my responsibility, and taking into account all of the facts and circumstances. So who are the players? What's the timing? What are those people going to infer from what I'm doing? So, you know, I'm weary of the board getting closer and closer and being asked, I'm not saying you're necessarily asking in this case, but being asked to define exactly where the line is. Tell me exactly where the line is so I can walk right up to the line and spit over it. I want to be right up to the line. When true ethics would require somebody to go, oh, there's a line over there, I'm going to back up. I'm going to stay as far away from that line as I can possibly be, because I don't want to risk the possibility of that reasonable person inferring that I had done something unethical. So I guess that's my summary of where I'm at, what my feelings are after 8 years. Thank you.
Reactions to that, Councilor Brekke?
3 things came to mind that I jotted down as you were talking. First of all, when you're talking about appearances of impropriety and conflicts, side by side, the conflict has to be a conflict in fact. I mean, in fact, what I did I do anything wrong? We can't be speculating about what people might think. We have to stick with the facts. The other thing is, I think our practice that we have in place when we are in judicial mode, because this isn't the only time we're in quasi-judicial mode, is to disclose. And I disclosed immediately. And again, I kept it confidential because I knew he was required to keep it confidential. He's obviously entitled to talk to some people, but it has to be confidential. So I kept it confidential. In fact, is what I did, is what I'm testifying to. And I disclosed it immediately. As soon as we assumed jurisdiction, I disclosed it and terminated, any future contact with him. And then I disclosed it a second time at the hearing in the form of this advisory opinion. I actually, said, I used that and submitted that as my full involvement, the limitations of my involvement in this matter. And then the third thing that I jotted down as you continued on is, part of why I'm here and why I want this advice is because I also want to try to encourage the board and the city attorney's office to do more of this publicly as part of your service to the citizens. I agree with you. It is a fine line. And I said that at the hearing. I said, I knew I was walking a fine line. I was uncomfortable walking it, but I did not know how this man was supposed to get any information as to the procedure, because I couldn't send him to the board and I couldn't send him to the city attorney's office. And so for me, on a go forward basis, another reason I'm here is hoping that I can do less and less of this. But if nobody's going to do it, I mean, how can a board, an ethics board exist that serves the residents, it serves candidates, it serves elected officials, it serves employees, and they have to have a lawyer to go through the process? I think, on the one hand, it has to be, I wouldn't say welcoming, I would say accommodating and receptive. I chose those words very carefully, accommodating and receptive. We don't want to say, bring us your complaints, yeah, we do not want the word weaponization of the ethics board, absolutely. But, people should feel like, as they tiptoe into it, as the board sees more and more that there's something there, they should be receptive to what these outsiders are telling us that's going on in our city. And so I see the whole thing circles back to, yes, I think we can do a better job as a government in our processes, making them more receptive, to those people. But if that's not going to happen, I will probably still continue to walk that fine line. But I tell you what, every time I do, to the extent that it's possible, I'll come to you first, and I'll give you that specific set of facts, just like I'm doing today.
I'd offer a comment. Councilor Brekke, your request was for an opinion about whether you violated 35.053. I don't see any violation even close, in my opinion. And it was a bit of an unusual circumstance with Mr. Cunningham. At that point, you were not in a decision-making capacity. It was completely within this board's jurisdiction at that time. This board, I think, we've got some criticism, but we have to be cognizant both of the complainant's rights and the accused rights. We, in a decision-making capacity at that point, can't be taking sides. We can't be advising one party to the other how to go about. So it's a difficult situation from our standpoint. I believe your conduct, frankly, was admirable. I think in helping a citizen, you were not in a decision-making capacity at that time. You helped a citizen who was in need of help and advised them. I just don't see any problem with that whatsoever. I hope people understand that we were not in a position to be giving advice to either party, whether it's Councilor Neitzert or Mr. Cunningham. And so, to me, I guess I commend you for your assistance of him. You disclosed it that when you became in a decision-making capacity, when it went to the city council, you disclosed it. And I think that's all you're obligated to do. So, in any event, I don't see this as being close to being a violation, and I commend you for your assistance, Mr. Cunningham. I would say it'd be different if you got into the substance of it. Here's, oh, you should look into this. This person said this. I mean, that might be different. Well, from what I understand, what you presented, everything you advised him on was procedural, and I don't see any problem with that.
I certainly would echo Mr. Fritz's comments and position. I think on behalf of the board, I think we owe you and we owe the public a little explanation as to how difficult and tricky it has been to navigate the rights of the accused here we have an open meetings law, yet you have this right to confidentiality, and also our obligation to remain objective and not to take sides in a matter. I personally, we heard from Mr. Zokaities today, we've heard from Mr. Danielson, we've heard from you. I think they're all talking about this ombudsman type role. You didn't all use that term, but we take our role as the Board of Ethics very seriously. And when 20A was dismissed, it was a confidential matter. As far as we are concerned, it remains a confidential matter. This board has never disclosed anything about 20A, to my knowledge. And so when we dismissed it, had we provided guidance to anyone, there was the danger that we would have violated the rights of confidentiality for the accused. And that's what we were very careful not to do. Furthermore, it's very tricky when we're lay people, with the exception of Dan. He's an attorney. We also we recognize that we had to go out and get special counsel. We're all trying to navigate this and do the best job we can. But the dismissal of 20A, for us to have given anybody guidance on how to proceed, would have put us on a very slippery slope. Had confidentiality been waived, I think it would have been a very different situation. But that's the reality of it. The other thing that you mentioned, and I think the public should understand how this board handled the delivery of an elaborate packet of information to City Council. Essentially, I was subpoenaed on behalf of the board to deliver, I don't know how many pages of documents it was. Bonnie, how many pages is that packet?
I'm not remember, was there 170?
170 pages. We didn't, this board did not drop that on the City Council when the hearing was convened. I will tell you that we responded to that subpoena within 4 hours. Bonnie, is that correct? We produced. Bonnie Woolen and the staff here at the City Attorney's Office did an extraordinary job pulling all that together within a matter of a few hours, and we delivered it to the city clerk and to the City Council the afternoon before the day of the hearing. All right. So it was City Council through your special counsel who made the decision not to provide that to any member of the City Council until your hearing began. So I think we acted in good faith. I think we realized the complexity of this matter, and we expedited our delivery of those materials. I want to make that clear on the record, that we were not trying to do a document dump on City Council at the start of beginning of a 4-hour hearing. That was not our intent at all. All right. So
I appreciate knowing that, because that was, again, as an attorney, 170 some documents, and you walk into the hearing and it's there. I couldn't look at it.
that was
And
so
so again,
we
not to cast blame on anyone, but procedural flaw, clearly a procedural flaw. And I think,
we at that
how
point
can
we
you
didn't have,
justify the decision we made when we didn't look at any of the materials before we went in to make the decision?
we did not have jurisdiction at that point. The jurisdiction was entirely with City Council. We complied with a subpoena. In fact, we expedited that. You should have been over here at City Hall
I can only imagine.
trying to put all this together. Produced, 16 packets. We killed a lot of trees that day. Or Brownie Willem killed a lot of trees. And I publicly want to commend Bonnie Willem for the job that she did. Just provided terrific service here.
I appreciate knowing that.
So
I will speak to our staff about that.
I thought that clarity is important for everybody,
It is.
and we take that right of confidentiality that belongs to the accused. We take that very seriously, and as I say, to this day, we have not disclosed anything about 28. We have not acknowledged that there's any connection between 28 and 28B. Maybe there is, and maybe there isn't. But you're not going to. This board is not going to disclose that. So, further questions, Councilor Brekke? Susan?
Well, I'd like to respond to the comments that have been made by our board members. It's not directed at Councilor Brekke. I do think that we've heard the discussion of we can't give legal advice to one side or the other. But I do think this board could do a better job communicating and explaining things to citizens who come before us. I'm looking back at the minutes of the meeting in which we handled complaint 20A. The motion that was made at the end of that was Greg Neitzert moved that ethics complaint 20A dated March 4th, 2020 be dismissed without prejudice, we've said that before, by this board for lack of jurisdiction to hear the complaint alleging a violation of ordinance 35029 as the cited ordinance does not apply. Motion was seconded by me and approved 5-0. As that motion stands, I think it included all the key elements. Dismissed without prejudice, he could file it again. Lack of jurisdiction, and we stated in there, cited ordinance does not apply. But then comes the next part, public input. John Cunningham asked who had jurisdiction on the matter. He was advised by the chair that the ruling would stand and the board could not provide him with legal advice. I will ask the city attorney, at that point, could we have responded to that by saying, the motion says the stated ordinance, the cited ordinance does not apply. He was asking, you could tell from his question, who had jurisdiction? He was understanding that we said, we don't have jurisdiction, and so his natural question was then, who does? Well, we weren't at all helpful at that point. And I think that's part of what has led to everything that has transpired in the months since. And I think, I just want to state, I think we could do a better job of explaining things. We're not giving legal advice. We're just trying to explain to an average citizen how to navigate this stuff. So, that's my comment.
Yeah, I would completely agree with what everybody is saying, and Councilor Brekke said something, she couldn't send him to the board, and she couldn't send him to the city attorney's office. And I know in that meeting, I asked the city attorney, or the attorney that was representing us or helping us, where do people go when, walk us through when someone goes to file a complaint, can they ask you a question? And I don't recall specifically the answer, but it was something like, we can't give advice. So I kind of have the same sense of, where do people go? This is complicated. These ordinances are hard to understand. And how does somebody file a complaint if they have to get it exactly right? That's concerning to me. I still don't think we have the answer to that. It would be good for the city in some way to find the best way to help people do this. And so Danny said it very well. I think Councilor Brekke did a good job helping this man, because it didn't seem like anybody else in the room could that day. So.
Stacy, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I will address that, and I'll take well, somewhat of a different approach, but an approach comparable to what Mr. Fritz said, which is, you have to understand the context of the environment, that you were in at the time, and what you're talking about is roused as a turn of a phrase, right, in a motion, where you couldn't have anticipated what was to follow, right? And so the point is well made, and maybe attorneys view things a little differently, but anytime, and it's not unlike the city attorney, right? Because if you look at my role in the city is defined in city charter 4.03, okay? Which identifies the city attorney, advises the mayor, the council, the employees. I'm not an attorney for the populace, right? Just like, so what I have to think about, if I would get a question, and Councilor Brekke and I have talked about this, where does it go for help, right? Well, there are methods in which the ethics board can provide additional information to the citizenry about how this works. Does that happen in the context of an individual complaint, where you help someone cure the complaint that they brought forward? Now you're getting into legal advice, right? And as a body, of course, you're not an attorney. You say, well, this is wrong and we find we can't proceed on this as a matter of law, right, in consultation with your attorney. But for you to then take the next step and say, well, here's how you cure it, from a legal point of view, it begs the question, what if you're wrong? So now you've given advice to somebody who's coming forward and trying to do this, and it's wrong. That's what attorneys live under, that concern, and that's why we all have malpractice insurance, right? Because it's like, we're not guaranteed we're right. And so the concern there is, and Counselor Brekke, and the fun thing about ethics being principles as opposed to the law, and you look at the canons in the Code of Ethics, there's a certain element of tell me who I represent, right? Because, you know, Counselor Brekke can cite Canon 7, 34.009, which says that council members have a duty to continue to inform and educate the citizenry about the affairs and processes of city government, right? So she cites that, so that's what I'm doing. I'm fulfilling my city council role. That's what I do to the citizenry at large and to an individual. But the other side of that is, hey, you're helping cure the defect for a citizen when you have the potential to sit in judgment of this very issue. And so it's a complex matter that matters in how you address it. And so when it comes to, you know, we as a board can do, you know, better with our citizens, absolutely. And there can be anything, and we deal with this in other city capacities too. Do you put out, I'll use an example that the planning department has held a planning, you know, class for citizens who are interested in how do you plan a city, right, and better educate them. What I would respectfully submit is, as an ethics board, if you're faced with, well, we can't proceed, and again, you're in consultation with your attorney, they're saying, well, we can't proceed on this, and under advice of counsel, well, we can't accept the risk to help you cure this, because it's exactly what you said, Mr. Chairman. There are interests on both sides of this, and as soon as we do that, and say the accused comes back with a faulty defense, and you'd say, well, had you said X, we would have maybe found that persuasive. So there's a slippery slope component to that. So I would just tell the ethics board, don't be too hard on yourselves in the fact of that decision, because you make the best decision you can at the time. And because I run into this on a regular basis if I get a call from a citizen. And of course, we're always going to try to err on the side of being courteous and helping people understand those things. But the educational component is very different than an actual individual action that's been initiated. So,
in fact, I submit that had we handled that differently, maybe as suggested we should have, we would have heard from the accused and their lawyer that we were acting inappropriately in helping one side or the other. So
there's obviously a gap. I'm not saying that we should have done something differently or the city attorney's office should have done something differently, but I think we've all said there's a gap. So that's a problem we can't solve here today, but I think it's important to go on record as saying how can citizens better access this process, average citizens.
we certainly have the power within 35.010 to recommend legislative action, adopt procedural rules, things like that. But I agree with Attorney Koistra that not in the context of a complaint. That's probably not the right avenue, but we could make it an agenda item.
Well, and if I may, to a certain extent, the board did do that in the context of its letter to the council. Of course, I was recused from both, so I was halfway on the sidelines of that whole thing. But there, when you reference the code of ordinances, and now, you know, as Ms. Harris is saying, there are gaps here. You know, so those are the things that, as a body, you do. You recommend those changes, and you know, I can tell you, people, present company included, are contemplating what those changes may be to try to eliminate those gaps. And of course, that's an ongoing process throughout our state and nation when you're trying to improve the body of laws that exist, both legally and ethically, to say, well, let's try to eliminate those gaps. You know, in this particular instance, as we talked about with the ordinances, one of them references city employees, basically, city officials, and one references elected officials. So somebody could look at that and say, well, it's an honest, easy mistake to make, but it's also one that sort of presumes that people are going to read that. And so, you know, as far as that goes, I think, well, I think we've covered a lot of that ground, and I don't see any notice about disagreement there.
Councilor Brekke, we want to give the public an opportunity to present any testimony if anybody wishes to come forward. Anyone wishes to address this matter?
Bruce Danielson again.
And Bruce, I think we're going to put you under oath.
Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you shall give relative to this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the penalties of perjury?
Yes. I found that a very interesting discussion that y'all just had. Recently, I was accused of being a public advocate, and I had to clearly state that a public advocate, an ombudsman, is a government employee that is doing the assistance of guiding the public through a process. I proudly claim to be a citizen activist. Nobody pays me to do what I do. Nobody pays me to be here. I am here because I want good government. A public advocate is what some of you were referring to as many governments all over the world, somebody who can guide a person through a process without liability. In Sioux Falls, because we don't have a public advocate or an ombudsman system, we should be able to use our city council members to help us guide through the process. The first time I contacted a city council member was 10 years ago. And the city council member I contacted told me that the mayor had promised retribution to this individual if that individual ever did anything on behalf of a citizen. That mayor at the time had said the city council member's job is only to sit in that room over there and vote. And other than that, they're to stay out of all involvement with city council. So through the years, in the past 10 years, as I have had my issues with the city, I have tried to work with different city council members. There are city council members who have promised ethics violations against these individuals and others if they got involved to try and help me or other citizens. There should never be the threat to a city council member that because they tried to assist a citizen to be involved in good government, that there would be a chance they would be standing here or sitting in that room like Greg Neitzert was for trying to help a citizen. The thing that becomes very disconcerting for people like me who just want good government is somebody being able to say Bruce Danielson should have some kind of a violation against him, or there's some discussion that because Bruce Danielson brought an ethics violation against an individual that's sitting at the council or a city employee, that now I should be paying the cost of that individual hiring an attorney just because I brought a complaint to this room is totally against everything that somebody like me believes in. And then I would be fighting for a public advocate position that would essentially probably take the place of this body. We shouldn't have to go to these extremes. We should never have the threat of Bruce Danielson having to pay $10,000 or $20,000 in legal fees because we found a fraud violation or a probable cause violation. We come to this board because of the discussion we just had here. We come to this board because we want to know where those bars are. As we've said in the past, and Mr. LaFollette, you've made quite a few references to this over the 6 years I've been coming here. is the laws down here, the principles up here. Everybody has their level of where their principles are, but we as a community, we have a community principle that we're trying to attain. This body is to help us find that community principle. It's not going to be any problem for this board in the courtroom, down the street, or anywhere else if this body finds a community principle that we can live with. So we have to establish that community line somewhere. We know what the law is, and we know that there's a prison up on the hill if you violate it to an extent. There's another one in Yankton if you file one that has a federal offense. So we need your help establishing where these principles are for the community. Having Board of Ethics threats leveled on us just because we or a public official are trying to help a citizen through a problem, we shouldn't have it. I know that the 4 individuals that I have asked for help with in the past were threatened with ethics violations because they helped. And so some of them have backed off, others have said, let it happen. I go with the ones that say, let it happen. Because sure, there's a lot of bluster that comes with it, but if this board doesn't establish some community principles that we can live with, you did it with the librarians, you did it with the police officers, you did it with Jack Eckhoff when he was here. I believe those. There's some confidential ones that I've been involved with here, and though you didn't follow through with mine because I followed the wrong ordinance, I followed the one for employees versus the member. That is an issue that we have to work with. We have to make sure that we go in the right direction on this, but in the end, we're looking for the community principle. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public testimony?
Good morning. Are we doing the swearing in, or am I?
We're going to swear you in.
Cool.
Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence that you shall give relative to this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the penalties of perjury?
I do.
Counselor, would you identify yourself for the record?
Yes,
please?
absolutely. Counselor Pat Starr, I represent the Northeast District of Sioux Falls. Hopefully I can get close enough here to do this. I always worry when constituents come before the council and say they didn't intend to speak before they got up before us, but I truly did not expect to speak today, but there were a couple of things that I wanted to point out. And I think first of all, I'd like to thank you, Mr. LaFollette, Mrs. Rouse, for your service as your terms come to an end. And I really appreciate what you have done. I know this was definitely a sausage-making experience for all of us. But the thing that stands out to me through this process of 20B is the more opportunity that we can to open it to the public really makes a difference. That's when the speculation, that's where I think this group got criticized more than anything, when the public didn't feel like they knew what was going on or what was happening as part of the process. Again, I totally understand the balancing act between the accused and the person bringing the accusations. Again, doing some Monday morning quarterbacking, the thing that concerns me is what you were talking about earlier. When we have citizens come forward and are bringing potential corruption and misuse of government funds and breaking, I almost feel like there's got to be a little more balance to that side so that they feel comfortable. I really, looking back at this situation, just as a regular citizen, would find it really uncomfortable what Mr. Cunningham had to go through. I think he has potentially been libeled and slandered by many members of the public and the accused, and I don't believe an individual citizen does that. Running for the council, serving on boards, I think we sign up for a little bit more of that. We don't deserve it, but I think that's part of it. But when you take someone, a concerned citizen who comes before their government and makes accusations of corruption, I think they deserve a lot better treatment than that. The other thing that I found out this morning by coming to this meeting is the Chairman Marsh's comments about when we would have received the information from this body. Going through 171 pages of documents during a public meeting under camera and not having a chance to review that, I think is totally unacceptable, and it'll be on the top of my list of finding out who did or didn't make that decision to withhold those documents from me when I was making that decision. So basically, to sum it up for me, I think the thing we're looking for is that ombudsman or a whistleblower statute of some kind that allows citizens to come forward and maybe not necessarily anonymously, but still have to say who they are and why they're doing that and making sure that they're found. I think those whistleblower protections would really help our city to point those things out. And again, Mr. LaFollette, you pointed out the factions that are probably the council and the politics of it. I think as a community, we've had a pretty good run for 20 plus years of not having a partisan bent to our city government. And I think that's changed in just the last couple of years. I think we've seen partisan politics really be incorporated into the council. And I think the complaint 20B was part of that, of seeing partisan politics being into our council rather than looking at a nonpartisan way. And I think that slope has gone downhill rather quickly. And I think that's this body's responsibility to bring some of that back so that our community looks as the council as a nonpartisan group. We can disagree, but it's really become party politics now between the two sides and the factions that have really been introduced to the council, and I feel really bad about that. I think that was one of the best parts of our city government, is that nonpartisan. In the past, we haven't known. You can check to find out what someone's party is. Today, it's very obvious, and you don't have to go very far to do that. So, again, thank you for your service. I know this has been very difficult on all of you as well, but anytime we do something the first time, it takes a little bit more to do that. So I would encourage you, from my takeaway, to do as much publicly as you can as you balance the rights of the accused and the person doing the accusing. I think one of those things that you could look at, 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning is, as you can tell in the room, very difficult for people to come here and be part of it. I know as volunteers it's difficult to find a time when the 5+ staff can do that. I would also encourage you to meet at Carnegie. Mr. Danielson has been a regular caller and friend of mine, I guess, over the last 4.5 years as part of the, as constituents reach me. But I don't trust his camera. I don't trust him having the only video of this proceeding, and I think that it would serve the public to have your rulings available if someone chose to come forward in the future, that they could review previous meetings. Minutes are fine, but I think in today's age, people expect to be able to see the video and the discussion of what you're doing. Also, I think from ADA accommodations and sound, Carnegie is a much better place. We've gotten to the point where we release Parks Board meetings, and I really respect the role of the Parks Board, but what you folks are doing is even more important, and to have a video history of that, I think, is very important. So I've definitely gone over my 5 minutes, and I knew I would when I said I wasn't planning on talking. So thank you again for your service.
Thank you for your testimony. Any further public testimony regarding 20-C? All right, we will move into deliberations then as a board. So the floor is open.
Okay, tip my hand.
Anyone wish to offer a motion? Mr. Fritz, you care to grab the
Sure. I'll move that we issue an opinion that, based upon the evidence presented by Councilor Brekke in both her written submissions and her oral testimony today, and based upon the language of 35.053, that we issue an opinion that there has been no violation of such provision. Has been and would not be going forward under the same conduct.
All right, is there a second to that motion?
I'd second that.
Open for discussion.
Just to clarify, with this, you said 20C, but we use the letters for complaints. Would this be 20-2?
It's 20-3.
Yeah, it's
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not a complaint. Yeah, it's 20-3. It's
3, okay.
third
I misspoke.
administrative request.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, let's move to a vote then, and let's do a roll call vote on that. Bonnie Wall, please.
Dan Fritz,
Aye.
Sue Rouse,
Aye.
Greg Neitzert,
Nay.
Jeff Marsh,
Yes.
Linda Harris.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes 4-1. And I think we now need a separate motion asking the city attorney to refine the language. How do we have the, I know we have standard motion we offer up for the city attorney to draft an opinion on our behalf.
That's what they ask us to draft. Do you have that language?
I have that motion.
Oh, yeah.
Do you mind
I know
offering
there's a slip of paper somewhere.
Do we mind offering that?
I move to authorize the board's legal advisor, Stacy Koistra, to draft an advisory opinion consistent with the discussions and motion of the board, and to authorize the board chair to both approve and sign the opinion as drafted on behalf of the board.
Is there a second to that motion?
I second.
Okay, discussion on the motion. Proceed with a vote. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Are there any abstentions? Passes 5-0. All right, that concludes our action on 20-3. We wish to take a 5-minute recess. All right, we'll take a 5-minute recess and reconvene here at, we'll make it 10:35, we'll reconvene. It is 10:35, and we are back in session, and we're awaiting the arrival of David Zokaities, who is next up on the agenda. Back in session, Greg, and waiting the arrival of Mr. Zokaities with parking meter. He's in the restroom.
this letter, did we receive this letter from August 11th? It's referenced in the minutes. You said something earlier about, but it wasn't included.
The letter to the city council?
The letter to the city council.
Yeah, no, that was my point. It was
Jack's letter.
the letter that I wrote on behalf of the board
Was not.
was not included in the packet, that's what I said.
Okay.
So that is now being corrected and will be part of the public record.
It's part of the motion.
Okay, so Mr. Zokaitis, you, our understanding that you filed what was originally titled an ethics complaint dash gifts of travel. It is our understanding you have since had a conversation with our city attorney, and you are not filing an ethics complaint. You are simply submitting a request for an investigation. Is that correct?
I think that's correct, yes.
Okay, so I would ask the city attorney, do we have jurisdiction in this matter?
Yeah, the way I would address that is City Ordinance 35.010C states that the Ethics Board's powers and duties include the ability to conduct investigations, inquiries, and hearings concerning any matter covered in, and there are a couple different provisions there. What I would say really is a threshold matter from a jurisdictional point of view is that the way I interpreted this is that the state law provides that there needs to be an opportunity for public input. In public input, any member of the public can come and make a statement or a request. And so really as a threshold matter, what we did discuss the fact there's a complaint that nobody's identified and that it was a request at the end of his letter to make it public. So in effect, treating this as public input, but putting an item on the agenda to ensure that he had notice was somewhat of a formal request. So we formalized it that way. So for purposes of today's discussion, it's not under public input, but I believe that it's consistent to allow Mr. Zokaitis to speak and make a request to the board.
Is that
That's good,
understood? So had you filed a complaint and named an individual, then we would proceed in a much different fashion. But we'll give the floor to you, sir.
All right.
We're going to swear you in.
Okay.
Or is he still, Darrell? Were you sworn in earlier?
No.
Do you solemnly affirm that the evidence you shall give relative to this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the penalties of perjury?
I do. So I'd like to, I'm David Zokaitis, just for the record. I'd like to give us a condensed version of 35.053. It says, city officials shall not accept any gift in the form of travel under circumstances in which it could reasonably be inferred that the gift could be expected to influence the officer. All right, so that's 35.053. And there was a letter that the Board of Ethics provided the City Council dated August 11th, talks about third-party paid travel, and then the letter you wrote, the practice appears to be common. Well, I'm thinking that's not quite all right. It looks like there's a problem with the city officials accepting gifts, aka bribes, and we should really clarify the extent of this practice and get some transparency and get more integrity in the government and let the citizens have more confidence in their government. So that's my request. We just got to figure this stuff out. We need to know who did it, how often, how much money was involved. And that's all.
Questions from the board?
Pardon?
Asking the board if they have questions of you, Mr. Zokaitis. Okay, we'll now allow any public testimony on this matter. I think that's appropriate. So stand down just a moment, please.
Do I get sworn in again?
No, you're covered.
Bruce Danielson. That line in that letter was disturbing to different council members who even made comments during meetings and outside of meetings where they've never received any travel. They've never received any gratuities of any kind that they've tried to play very ethical in it. And so that opened up a Pandora's box of Now, who's been doing it since the statement was made in the letter that it was common practice? And for those of us citizen activists that go to the meetings, that watch what's going on, that have had reports of different things going on in the city, but we can't quite, get to that point of filing actual, charges, we wonder, who else is doing this? Who's doing tricks somewhere? Who, we do know that we have some city officials. We know that there was a city employee that went to that political event and was very prominent in that event. And then not talking about the council member that you folks talked about. We also know that the mayor was at that event. Who else, other than these three individuals that we know of, have been taking these junkets of some sort? You brought it up in the discussion, in the letter, and we think that an investigation, I wasn't part of his putting this thing together, but those of us that sat in the room and actually read the letter realized that you now are the keepers of some information that needs to be out in the public realm so that we can now decide as a public what's going to happen. So you have that ability as the Board of Ethics to do the investigations and to get to the root of this. No other body in this city has the ability to this body does. You have the ability to get a police officer, a detective involved in this, to root out this, to take testimony, to get depositions done, to find out how serious this problem is. And we would really like to have that brought public. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public testimony? Mr. Brekke?
I'm like Pat when it comes to this. I had no intention of speaking on this. I didn't actually even know David was going to do this because I've been out of town and just got the agenda last night. But, I had a concern when I read that too. And again, I just told you where I was from a knowledge standpoint. So then when I finally get the documents after the hearing and I read them, by then they've raised the issue about a trip that I took with the National League of Cities as having been, part of the documentation that was submitted in Greg's defense. And, so afterwards then I found out just how much that was a part of his case. And obviously it was very disturbing to me. There was no misstatements in the information that was presented, but there were some absences of information in the information that was presented. So I am taking advantage of this opportunity to clear my good name in what I did as being completely different than the trip that was in question here. But I also have the same questions as a council member. There was testimony by Councilmember Neitzert that the engineer's office and the police department do it all the time. And I thought, where is that coming from? And that's what he said at the hearing. And that blew me away. So I knew about the things that Bruce Danielson just testified to. I know about my own incident, but I didn't know about any of these things. So it does seem that a little further, and I don't think there has to be depositions and interrogatories. You're entitled to have a detective or a police officer sign, and you just have them go do some interviews, find out what's going on, and just we need to know so that people can be educated. So there aren't any more complaints brought. So I think it's a good idea. But I do want to clear the record on completely on really the absences, and I think I did it at the hearing. There was a completely different. There's a travel policy in place that allowed me to attend National League of Cities events. It says council members and their staff are active in South Dakota Municipal League and National League of Cities and may attend the organization's conferences, conventions, special events, committees, and district meetings. This was a committee type of meeting, and in addition to that, the entire council was solicited by the National League of Cities representative of the Military and Veterans Affairs, Elijah Herring Blake, sent email, at least one, I think 2 emails to the full city council, and nobody answered them. And I scrolled right through it, and then I noticed that it was National League of Cities, because it said free trip, up to Washington, D.C. to discuss this partnership with National Veterans Intermediary to work with the president and Congress to do a better job of delivering veterans services nationwide. And I looked at it and I scrolled right through. Then the second time I went back and was reviewing my emails, I looked at it again and it said National League of Cities. Says, oh, I'm going to check that out. So I did call up Elijah and asked what it was all about. And he told me in detail what it was about. And he said Sioux Falls was at the head of the game because of what its local Community Actions for Veterans group was doing. They were using collective impact, which is a model they wanted to use nationwide. So they wanted to bring us up and spotlight us. And they were telling the local group to get their elected officials involved. And he said, so he asked me to talk to Jill Baker, who is the head of that organization, to find out what was really going on here locally. So then I had coffee with Jill. So afterwards, I decided that it was something that I was interested in doing. And Jill did tell me at that meeting that she, actually had been trying to contact the council chair, Christine Erickson, who did not return her calls or emails, and the vice chair, Marshall Shelberg, who eventually did return her call. And said, well, the council's really busy. I don't think anybody's interested, but have at it. So I just want to understood that it was, it was a broad solicitation to the entire group. I did accept it after I found out what it was, knowing that I was going to be asked to do something along this really forefront and groundbreaking activity that was taking place at the national level. They wanted to do a top-down, bottom-up approach to solving the problem of getting distribution of services, better accomplished in a national effort. And Sioux Falls was already leading the way, and I was just finding out about it for the first time. So I then went to the city staff person and said, I'd like to do this. I'd like to follow up on this email. How do I do that? And then he's the one that followed the policy. He shepherded me through this, and he said, oh, it looks like it's pre-authorized. You don't have to ask anybody. But I did anyway. I thought, well, that's going to be weird. How can I not ask them or tell them that I'm going, and then I'm going to be asking for their support? And we did need their support, the city council support. And it's part of what we were asking for when we got 211 services to help with this distribution of veteran services. It was key to one of the things that we're doing. So I said, well, just put me on the open discussion and I'll tell them about it. So I told them about it at a public meeting. That was in your documentation, exactly what I said. And they said, it sounds like an exciting opportunity. Go see what's up. If it had been anything different when I got there, if I found out something different that I didn't want to be involved with, I surely wouldn't have been when I came back. But I have been involved, continue to be involved. It's extremely exciting. And again, I didn't need council support eventually. They became part of our resolution that we would get 211 services. There was also the mental health issue that was really driving that issue at the legislature, but also our congressman, our Congressman Thune and Round's office was involved with me because they're working at it on the national level, trying to execute the president's prevents order. So that's what I was involved in. That's what I've been involved in the entire time. And I'm continuing to be involved now. We're at an extremely exciting point recently, and there's probably going to be some announcements about it soon. But I would also add, as a final word, in that same policy, it says, the council supports the pursuit of training and education by elected officials to better serve their constituents. The council budget shall include appropriations for education and training for its members. Travel requests for conferences, meetings, and other events must be nonpartisan. Educational and of substantial benefit to the City Council and the City of Sioux Falls Council members. And the City of Sioux Falls Council members shall report key information following their attendance at an event or conference during a public meeting within a reasonable amount of time after returning. That's the policy and procedure manual that was in place at the time. So under this procedure manual, Greg would not have been allowed to go and have the city pay. The only way he could go was to either pay for himself or have somebody else.
Because that policy only covers when it's travel reimbursed or paid for by the City of Sioux Falls.
Right.
That's right.
That's correct. But it doesn't include partisan activities. Again, you couldn't submit a request. It would have violated this policy. So I just thought that, and how it ties into what David's asking you to do. Again, we're all learning. This is not a criticism, but in the future, for the board to just rely on this, what the lawyers put together. Again, there was no misstatements in what was said, but there were some things left out. And I would have loved it if you'd just called me in. or had someone just do a little investigation. Before you made that statement, you could have had just a little investigation and go interview a few people, have them bring you back a report. Or even after, because you could investigate both during the probable cause phase, and you could have lodged an investigation, in further preparation for that higher standard of clear and convincing. When you were the, sort of quasi-prosecutor for us at the hearing, you could have had an investigation to fully develop the presentation. And, again, when another council member and elected official, we're obviously very sensitive to our images, is being brought in as part of the defense to the activities of the accused, it would have been nice to have had the opportunity to at least, be asked, and I would have welcomed it, not been hesitant about it. I was sure, because I should be able to explain, what I was doing. So I would just add that commentary to clear the record and the air on that for what I did. If that was one of the things that was in that conclusory statement that it looked like people were doing it, it's very, very rare. I mean, other than mine, other than the one I've heard about Kermit, I have never heard of it, really anybody accepting trips.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Brekke. Any further public testimony? Okay. Any discussion from the board itself?
I think it's difficult because I think a lot of, what prompted this was comments made during executive session. So it's very difficult to talk about it.
Can you speak a little louder?
Very difficult to talk about it, the context of it, because it was during the confines of an executive session.
Well, Councilor Brekke mentioned a statement that was made during the open hearing in the council about members of the police department and the engineer's office frequently doing this. So that is information that could be included in consideration of this. That isn't anything that we're referring to from an executive session.
Any further discussion?
We are not a legislative body. We are in a position to suggest to the city council that they improve, update, add to, modify, whatever the code as it exists. But we're not in a position to draft that. We've indicated to them in our opinion in 20B that we found the current code insufficient, vague, and not giving us enough guidance, not giving employees and staff members enough guidance, because we have words like reasonably inferred to influence. And I would submit that anytime there is any meeting at all, the purpose is to influence somebody. And if you're not trying to influence somebody, then why are you having a meeting? You're trying to, explain your ideas or find out their ideas, and there's some level of influence, and the influence carries a derisive connotation. And like Mr. Danielson referred to these as junkets rather than trips, and it's very purposeful. It's to characterize a trip as something evil as being a junket, when another person might say it is a trip. So what we've suggested to City Council, what we've discussed, is that they could clear all of this up with prospective transparency, so that all trips are approved, are disclosed to the City Council and approved. I don't care who pays for them, but they're all listed and approved before they take place. Not necessarily in a consent agenda, but in a specific spot so everybody can see it. In that way, the question of whether or not it is partisan, and, I mean, partisan if the sponsor happens to be a Democrat or a Republican, does that make the underlying education, does that make it partisan or not? I don't know. I don't know what the definition of that is. But to try to go through and determine retrospectively each one of these, going back and back and back and back in time, to me seems to be an exercise in futility. We're far better off, I believe, to urge the city council to fix the problem so that Ms. Brekke or the mayor or Mr. Neitzert or whomever doesn't have to worry about, gee, will some reasonable person infer that I'm being influenced? You know, we've heard that many vendors provide education as a part of a contract. You buy a set of software, you send somebody to learn how to use that software. They don't do that in Kadoka. They do it in San Diego. You know, so does that all of a sudden make that a junket? I don't know the answer to that, and I can't make those decisions. I don't think it's fair to try to make those decisions retroactively. I think they should be made prospectively by the city council, and we should encourage the city council to amend or modify the code to do that. And so with all of that in mind, I'm not inclined to open an investigation that ultimately has no purpose other than to prove to the city council what we already know. You have a problem.
Further discussion? Anyone wish to make any motion or take any action on this matter? Okay, that concludes the regular agenda. So the chair would entertain no else. We can open it up to any new business that any board member wishes to bring up. Therefore, the chair would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second? For a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Ladies and gentlemen, we stand adjourned.